Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson and this is Ask the Master for ICC TV. The main idea of the show is to provide a forum for you, the viewers, to ask questions about chess and the world of chess and chess strategy, any sort of questions related to chess. You can send these questions to me by email in advance at askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. You can message me at ICC if you're an ICC member. My handle is John L. Watson, L as in lion, so JOHNLWATSON. Or you can ask me in the chat right now, which we're doing increasingly these weeks, which is fun. And I see there are people on there already. Rich, wow, Alan, and Cap78 Red 2.0. Okay, that's quite a handle right there. So those are the best ways to submit. You can also chat with each other on the chat channel, which is fun, and you don't really have to make it related to what I'm showing or talking about. It should be something about chess, I imagine. And that's about all you need to know. The questions usually tend to be about openings, chess strategy, chess players, maybe some chess history. I do a lot with chess books and videos. So I thought I'd start right in. Let me first just look at the chat for a second. And I'd start right in with things from last week. I have several things that I didn't get to. In an unusual position. Okay, Alan is asking about the English opening and, oh, the English defense to the English opening. I'll take a chat first, but then I'm going to get to some questions from last week. It's always good that you come on early and ask me a question. You deserve an answer. Okay, so we have an English defense. Let's do that real quickly and see what we've got here. Knight c3, bishop b7, e4. Knight f6. Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good answer because e5, knight e4 is not scary. It's a pretty good. You can always just play e6 though. Maybe it's actually easier to just play e6 first. See what he does. If he goes here, you're in a familiar position, and there's nothing special he can do about knight e4. For example, if he plays here, which is a common move, well, here you can play bishop b4. We've talked about that on the show, actually. And if he does something sort of abstract like this, you can also go knight here. So maybe I'd recommend e6 first, small point. I think this is okay. e5, knight here has to be correct. Knight takes, bishop takes. This should be okay. Black's better developed. White has the big center. White plays d4, bishop b7. He's afraid of the bishop getting stranded there. I don't think you really have to be afraid of that. So you could just play a simple move like e6. Might be a little bit better, actually. I like Black's position here just because it's awkward for him, White, to get that piece out. And I wouldn't want to waste one more, or use one more move. It's not a waste, but use one more move retreating the bishop unless I had to. How is he going to attack that bishop and get it off that diagonal? Not so simple, right? So, and you've got bishop b4 check ideas. So I would play e6 there, small point, but at any rate, bishop b7. Actually, this looks a little scary because of d5, but he didn't play d5. Okay, so that's my comment so far, is I don't like bishop b7. I suspect he can get very greedy here and take a big center. Not that knight f3 is bad at all, but this would be a little scary. Black plays here, and now White probably just stops bishop b4 check. On the other hand, Black's well developed, and this might be okay. This might be okay. A lot of funny ideas for Black. Black could play queen h4 ideas and things like that. So maybe bishop b7 is okay. I just prefer e6. You can always play bishop b7 later. Okay, so knight f3 makes a lot of sense for White. Don't overextend. d5 question mark. Yeah, I would think just e6, the normal move. And now this is pretty ambitious because of bishop b4 check ideas. I would think Black's doing pretty well here because of a big lead in development. But you have to prove that. Get castled really fast. Should be okay for Black anyway. So e6 would be normal. d5 is a funny move. Normally d5 is a little suspicious because when he takes it, these pawns become sort of unopposed. But I don't see that d5 is that bad. He played bishop e2 question mark. The only thing I can think of, queen a4 check maybe? I mean, sometimes you can play here. Well, actually, that's interesting because you can't even take because this is so strong. That's probably ridiculously strong. Whoops. So maybe e6 is an idea. I wonder if you could get away with this. It's also very risky after knight h4 kind of ideas. Okay, so maybe that's why you gave a question mark. Let me see. Does it say? 9 e6. Okay, h6, castles e6. I had the opportunity to play e6, destroying his position. Oh, you were white. You're absolutely right on move 9, but you could also do it on move 8, I think. So it looks like a good move. Yeah, because even if black was able to surround this and win it, it wouldn't really matter because you'd have so much play. I'm not sure exactly what to do here. Maybe this move to stop queen d6 for the moment. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. e6 was a good move, and you're saying that you played h6 and gave him yet another chance to play. I'm sorry, he played bishop e2, h6, and now this would have been absolutely killing. That's believable because white has one extra piece out. Ouch, very good. That's very interesting. Always watch for that trick is the moral of the story. That's another reason to get e6 in. So you're right, d5 is a question mark move, and then h6 is even worse. You're absolutely right. But it's interesting. A local rated game. Excellent. Okay, I've declined. I'm having days, winning streaks, losing streaks. Okay. Everybody has winning and losing streaks, that's for sure. Losing streaks in the pools and play that I've played. Well, you know, in the pools, the thing is you're sitting there at home, and if you're tired, you're tired, and if you start losing, you get depressed. It's not like a real tournament where you get a little chance to catch your breath and think hard and wake up and get some perspective. Yeah, I think we're all like that. We go on these streaks of playing badly and well. Yes, this is Cap 78 Red 2.0 talking about his performance going up and down too radically. How do I get more consistent? Yes. Yeah, they're arguing about constant. Yes, definitely consistency, and is what you're looking for, as you know. Boy, I'd say just take breaks between games. Try and get enough time so you can think. You know, it doesn't really matter that much what's going on in these games in terms of results because you're just trying to get better. They're just fast games, probably, is my guess. You know, the pools are pretty quick time controls. You might consider playing some tournaments if you don't already, just because that way you get some slower chess and you get some chess where you're over the board, you're kind of away from that computer. I find the computer itself, it's almost like gambling. It gets kind of addictive, and once you get down, you get even more down, and maybe even a little more desperate. You take a few more chances. And you know, speaking of fun, chess philosopher here says more chess fun. You're not having as much fun when you start losing, so take a break. Don't play too many games at one point. You know, even if you're winning, you might want to take a break. Okay, with time controls getting faster and faster, how do older players adapt? The answer is I don't, but we'll get to that. Okay, so let me show you, so I'll start with that question, but right now I'll go to the things I wanted to show from last week. I owe you that. You've been sending me messages too that I want to answer, but especially the stuff from last week. Oh, I wanted to mention something about the Eurosoft gambit, which is that someone asked me about this last week, and I referred him to the show because we had talked about it, but I didn't give him a date. That was July 18th, 2016. So 7/18/16. It's that show. You can go on YouTube. You can say, Ask the Master Watson. You can Google Ask the Master space Watson, and you'll get all the shows, or sort of all. You'll get them eventually, sort of lined up on the right there. They're all archived. And the July 18th show has the Eurosoft. And I think as long as I was talking about the Eurosoft, I got another question about the other day. Apparently there's a lot of stuff on the web about the Eurosoft. That's this opening, by the way. So I thought I'd repeat real quickly what I said about it last time, a few things that I said about it last time. We did it in a lot of detail. So black takes. If black takes this one, you take and you're threatening queen d5. And that's very nice for white. So black almost always captures this way. And this is the Eurosoft. Now, black can transpose with knight c6 and things like that. But if black takes and white takes here, we've got the Eurosoft. And so black's avoided traditional lines. He's a pawn up, and he can get 2 pawns up in a lot of lines. And I showed you, for example, this line, which is a terrible move because there's nothing to do about rook e1 check and queen takes g7. That's just a killer. And then bishop h6. So that's actually losing. Something no one ever seems to play, or hardly anybody ever seems to play, is this move. And see if you recognize this. Knight here with a real solid position attacking the queen. Now white's 4 pieces ahead in development, arguably even more, because he's got his king to safety. But black stands incredibly solidly, and guess what this resembles, everybody? This is what we've been looking at for the last few weeks, the Belgrade gambit line. Very, very similar, and I think the assessment is similar too. Black is solid, but white, even without major pawn breaks, actually has some pretty good attacking chances here. So I looked at this a little bit, and I think, for example, that idea looks like it's just good for black, and why would white ever play this? But there's just so many pieces out. And then if black plays here, which is probably best, white just goes back. And black still has trouble getting all of his pieces out effectively because white is getting his pieces out so quickly. I mean, just let me see, for example. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to play queen here, actually. That's actually a more accurate move. And then if he tries to kick you, then I was going back. And I think it's funny about these positions because they look very solid for black, but white's got so many pieces out. And you just have to assess what you think is going on there. But in my opinion, white has plenty of play here, probably more than enough play. Okay, but going back to where I was, the main move is this. And I just wanted to repeat for those of you that can't find it, go back to find the old lectures or have trouble with that this move is actually, I think, a bad move. Because here black just breaks through and doesn't bother with c6s or d6s, just gets counterplay, gives 1 pawn back usually, and gets terrific counterplay. So the accurate move is knight c3, which will often get you to the same point, but many people play bishop g5 first. And now bishop e7 is usually played, but knight c6 is going to lead to the exact same position. After this, now d5 is not so great anymore because white can take it, right? And this is, white has terrific development, and either the king's going to get stuck in the center or the knight's going to be on the last rank, and white just retakes. White's not even a pawn down here, so that's very nice. So since he can't do that, he's going to go here, and as you'll see, that transposes to the game. The game went here, knight c6, queen h4. So there we go. There's the game, and it's possible to play. Let me go back a few moves. It's possible to play c6, for example, here. And we looked at a lot of things here, but I just want to show you just the basics. The basic is to go here, to keep a pin, and then there's a lot of sacrifices, but you're also just thinking you're just playing rook here and keeping him tied down. And probably bishop e6 is the best move. We looked at a lot of stuff, but one of the main lines you'll find online, you'll see a lot of games and analysis of this kind of thing. Very, very hard for black to defend this. This position turns out to be extremely strong. It's really fun. I mean, sacrifices all over the place. Takes, and black can resign. It's amazing. It's amazing variation. Okay, and let me just show you real quick what the other main line is. The other main line is this. Black just plays very solidly and opposes the bishop, and that's really a good idea. But it turns out that white can play. Well, there's other moves white can play, but this is enough. Oddly enough, just this 1 pawn down position, black has no weaknesses, but white has so much development that he actually stands pretty well here. I think you could even argue that he stands better here. This, I think, is one of the main games I gave last time. That's a cute little move. Maybe it's only equal, actually, but I think it's better for white because, for one thing, even this position is very awkward for black to develop in and to get his pieces out. I think we talked about that. There's a little bit of pressure here, so the knight has trouble moving. If g6 to get out of the way, there's h4, h5 ideas. Looks so harmless, but it's actually probably slightly better for black. But white here plays this move instead, and it ends in this cute idea, obviously not forced, but this beautiful idea of rook there. Black has to take here, he gets slaughtered. And then white goes over there, and all of a sudden rook h1 is a huge, huge threat. Black in this game played this, but it turns out that there's nothing that much better. There are better moves, but they're all somewhat better for white, regardless of what you do. You just take my word for that. And he runs away, and boom. Now you can't play knight takes knight because of mate down here. And this was actually the best way for black to play it, come to think of it, probably. Black got out of the attack by playing that clever idea. The only problem is now knight takes c7 is threatened, so black tries to attack the knight and get out of fork, But even though it's not a fork, it's still very good because the rook h8 was threatened. So now you win the exchange anyway, and you win a pawn, and you're a pawn ahead for nothing really. So this is a clear advantage for white. Just thought I'd show you that really fast. It's a little bit of a review. Then I want to show you a question from last week that I got actually a couple weeks ago, but I've been asked in different forms twice. And so I'm going to show a game related to that. And before I do that, I'll switch back to the chat and see what people are saying. Okay, chat folks, what have we got? With time controls faster, how do older players adapt? That's a very good question. I think my own experience is I've adapted very poorly. I think you simply have to go into the game thinking, I'm going to make quick moves almost no matter what. It doesn't hurt to make little marks on your score sheet and say that by move 10, I'm going to, I'm only going to have used 5 minutes or whatever. It depends on the time control. By move 20, I'm going to use 20 minutes, et cetera, et cetera. That's in a tournament game. In an over-the-board, in a online game, my feeling is you just have to start getting used to the idea of kind of throwing moves out there that you're not real sure of. I would look real quickly for blunders, blunder control. Even in a blitz game, I would kind of look quickly to say, if I make that move, does he have any checks or captures or forcing moves that are going to kill me immediately? You can do that very quickly, and then usually there's nothing disastrous, and you just make that move. But I don't have a really good answer to that because I think unless you're a full-time professional who's played his whole life and is so used to the clock that you can probably handle it. If you're just the average player, you're going to struggle with it. You're going to think more slowly as you get older. There's no question. And you're also going to want to think more slowly. Kids a lot of times don't really want to spend time, whereas older players get all fascinated with the position and tend to waste too much time and lose a lot of winning positions. So I don't have really good advice except essentially the clock is part of the game. It's part of the result of the game. It's just as important as your moves. So you have to treat it with a high priority. English opening, getting a question from chess philosopher also. C4, well, let's just look at this. Knight f6, d3, e5. I talk about this position in my third volume, my English, of my Mastering the Chess Opening series. I start out with the irregular Englishes. Knight f3, I talk about knight f3. I don't know if I talk about bishop b4 check. These are not normal lines. Reverse Moscow, Grischuk is white recently. Yeah, I would probably like to play this as white. I mean, it's a whole extra tempo, isn't it, knight here? So I don't know what he played, whether he tried to play this line. This line's popular anyway with black, just playing knight d7. And you're attacking this, and you're probably just going to play g3 next, is my guess. Well, a3 first. For example, if he plays there, the famous, this move which we've all seen, this is a good move because he can retake that way, right? Isn't that how it goes? Or you can take first. Maybe take first, actually. And if queen takes, then maybe just a3. Yeah, you get a Sicilian reverse. It's probably a lot of fun for white. Probably wouldn't play d5, but he might have to defend this. And yeah, you get a sort of a typical typical Sicilian position. So I would play there for ambition. Now you can always play there, which is the old main line, right? And it seems to me that because white's a tempo up, well, black isn't going to have time to play c5 for one thing with his Maroczy bind. He's going to have to play slowly. So this position is undoubtedly equal in theory, but might be fun to play for white. I wouldn't mind playing a position like this for white. And I'm not so sure I'd mind it for black either. It's more normal after knight there to simply defend that this way, or even play d6 if you're that kind of player, maybe a King's Indian player, for example. So this would be a little more common to play there. But interesting question. Yeah, that's fun. You can play that as either color, actually. But why is e6 so much better after h5? We're talking about, let me go back up. I'm trying to remember what we're talking about. Oh, after h6. Well, it's so much better because that made that diagonal even weaker. How did that go again? Okay, we were talking about the English defense. See if I can remember what we just looked at. We were talking about c4, b6, knight c3, bishop b7, e4, knight f6. Here, e5, by the way, may not be the best move because this position is quite comfortable for black. d4, I wanted to play e6 here. You played bishop b7. You didn't play e6 here either, did you? Oh, you played d5, that's right. Well, now, in this position, at least there's no hole here, too. Like, if you had h6 in, there'd be an extra hole here. And this move would be really, really strong because with a pawn on h6, you're not only threatening queen h5, you're threatening knight g6. So h6 would weaken things still further. And in fact, the way it happened in the game, which was bishop e2, h6, now this is much worse. First of all, that move is just, I think, almost, now we're on resigns, right? Bishop h5 check is just absolutely killing. And if f6, there's still this problem with, I'm sorry, well, f6 is still horrible because of that move. So I don't know what. I guess I said queen d6. I guess you have to allow him to play there, but you can see that the d6, whatever happens to that pawn, this has become a weak square too. So that's the answer to that. Okay, let's keep going here. High rich, e6, h6. Okay, here's some other English opening moves from Chess Philosopher. Yes, reverse Sicilian. For years I played this line. I guess I was just trying to avoid book or something, but also I had such good luck with it. For absolutely years and years and years I played this to get a... Most people didn't go into a reverse Sicilian here, partly because you're a tempo up in some of these more dramatic, some of these piece development lines. Usually with the Sicilian you're making a lot of pawn moves, pawn here, just going really slow and putting your pieces on the second rank, right? But in this position, you can play sort of a pin variation reversed, for example. You can play like this, for example, or a two knights reversed, moves like this. Now, I'm not saying black's lost here or anything, but it's a tough position to play. White's got some immediate initiative with knight takes, d4, d4, moves like that. So most people didn't play a reverse Sicilian here against me. They played either King's Indian variations, or sometimes they played this move, trying to break through with a reverse Alapin, trying to break through with d5. And then you have, I would tend to play knight f3, but I also played d4 sometimes. Yes, you can play a3 too. You can even play a3 on this move. My book, Mastering the Chess Openings Volume 3, which is 300 and some pages just on the English opening, it's the only book I know of that goes through irregular lines in the English at tremendous length. Some of them don't even mention things. I give a few pages to this, for example. I'm surprised how instructive that book is. I don't think I ever brag about my books, so I'll brag about my books. But I was looking at it the other day and going, wow, this would be a tremendous way to be introduced to positional chess. Anyway, this is a very interesting position. And I go over these lines in a lot of detail, 2 knight f3 on the second move. And the reason I do that is not because I'm recommending a repertoire, because I'm not. I'm discussing the English opening for white and for black. But I want to show why it is the main lines the main lines. So instead of just going right into, main things with either G3 or knight F3 or whatever, or E3 here or D3 or whatever, I try to show some of the irregular stuff first, just to show why it is white doesn't usually play them and what black can do about them. How do you break bad thinking process you've developed with better calculation plans and tactics? So my assumption, this is Jonathan Russell, my assumption from that question is that your main problem has been calculation and tactics. So that's the bad thinking process. And everyone argues about this. It's very, very difficult to give a good answer to that, besides practicing a lot and paying a lot of attention and practicing calculations. So a lot of people have, of course, tactics books that they go over the exercises in, and I think some of that is absolutely essential and good. Just get a big book of 500 tactical positions and cover up the moves, or do it online. There's plenty of programs online like Chess Tempo and others. I think chess.com has a bunch of stuff, and there's probably 100 different places you can go and get tactical exercises for free and look at them and solve them. And some of them are fancy. They give you a rating and all that, but you don't really probably need those. But just pretend you're in a real game. Don't look ahead. If you're in a book, don't peek ahead and solve tactical positions and pretend that you're in a real game. I mean, maybe even put a clock on it. The good players will put a little clock on it and give themselves a certain amount of time to do those. Now, the only problem with that is most tactical exercises are a little bit artificial, or they kind of all look the same. So another way you can get better at your tactics, your calculation, is just playing a lot and concentrating on those positions. Don't worry about your results so much. Like you could play online, but think for a long time in the tactical positions. And if you have to throw away your rating, so what? You can always get it back, right? I mean, unless you're playing for money or something. So I wish I had a better answer because that is an extremely difficult area, how to improve tactics. Besides just doing tactical exercises and calculating exercises, I like to do blunder checks for sure. I think people do neglect that. I've neglected that since I've been playing again. I actually forget to simply look before I make my move. First of all, right when they make their move, you want to look at your checks and your captures and your forcing moves, your most direct possible continuations. You'll be surprised what you miss after the game. You go, oh, I could have just played there, you know. And the same thing before you make your move, right before you make your move, take a look at the obvious direct attacks. Because a lot of the tactics and calculation things that people miss are based on just very simple one or two move direct threats. Because you only need one of those out of 40 or 50 moves to lose the game, or 50 or 60 or 70 moves. Hi, Jacob Surratt. What's your favorite second move for white in the English opening? Well, that's a great question because all the books now are like this. That's because it's too hard to learn all the things after knight c3. You have to deal with this. You have to deal with a lot of lines. You have to deal with a lot of lines where there's an early c6, d5 because that'll threaten d4. So almost every book you get now and will recommend, and every video and everything else will recommend playing that first. And that's just because it's simple. It's not because it's better, it's because it's simple. And the sad thing about that is we have 100 years of just incredibly complex, interesting theory that starts out with knight c3, which used to be the automatic move. All the great players played knight c3. And it's still a completely legitimate move, but it takes a lot of preparation. And these days, players feel like they don't have as much time for preparation. There's too many things to prepare for. So I think playing knight c3 is extremely healthy because you learn basics. You learn real chess basics. So I would say that's my favorite move. I've played it more often than anything else. Once in a while, I have just played this. If you haven't been studying certain lines, it's harder to get, it's harder to get in trouble if you play 2G3. Marin's 4 volumes have to do with 2G3, but I don't think he makes a very convincing case. So David Cummings has a recent book out with a repertoire with 2 knight c3. Very recent, this year, a few months ago. And it's a great book. I would pick up that book and think about playing 2 knight c3. It's much more interesting than g3. It teaches you a lot more about chess than 2 g3. So I'd say that's my favorite move. Okay, what happens after d4, knight f6, f3, d5? Okay, let's take a look at that. So, and then I'll get to something I want to get from the last couple of weeks, because I really owe that to people who send me questions or I promised I'd get to something last week and didn't get to it. Knight f6, f3. Okay, so what white's trying to do is get e4 in. Whoa, get e4 in. Now, of course, black can always play like a Pirtz defense, for example. Black can play like this. Or even e5 here is a completely legitimate move. So if you want to, you can avoid these lines as black. If you play here and white plays here, you basically got a Blackmar-Diemer gambit, which goes like this. And we've talked about the Blackmar-Diemer on this show a little bit. This, and then I think I recommended this c6 line, this Ziegler line, although you can play one of these moves next, although you can play any number of lines against the Blackmar-Diemer. Let me see. So what's the question? See, what happens after that? Well, what happens is if white is interested in getting the Blackmar-Diemer gambit, he gives up a pawn that way. And most people consider this maybe a little bit marginal because you are going to be a pawn down and black has no weaknesses. So people consider this definitely equal for black if he knows what he's doing, but maybe even slightly better for black if white isn't a little careful. On the other hand, in practice, you get these wonderful attacks. So you might be interested in doing this. You play bishop c4 or d3, you play bishop here. You might put the queen up here and castle queenside. All kinds of attacking ideas, and there are whole books on this. There are many articles or DVDs, so you can figure out how to play this as white if you're really adventurous. If you don't want to play that, then there's some question why you wanted to play f3. See, that's a bit of a problem. Now you have to decide. I mean, for example, you can play here and wait, but if black plays a move like this, for example, the best you've done here is transpose to a Eurosoft variation here, and my guess is most people don't really want to do that. There's also c5 here, I believe, is completely sound. In fact, it's quite a good move here in this exact order. So that's a real problem with knight c3, come to think of it. What else would you do besides play a Blackmar-Diemer for white? So the question is, why is white playing f3? And I guess I can't think of any other reason besides going into this line, doing this. So I hope that answers the question. That's kind of what usually happens after f3, d5. Then we get a question about composition chess puzzle, and we can go to that. I think I don't know the answer to that, but more importantly, let me get to things that I've some things that I was asked about. Oh, here's one of them, a French defense by transposition, as you can see. This is the Melkumian-Carlsen game I told you I would show last week, so I want to make sure I get to that. And it has to do with this funny little move. It has to do with the Tarrasch variation, the French defense. And I got a question about h6 and how I recommended this book as a possibility in my Dangerous Weapons French book. And I've written about it extensively in the chess publishing column that I have, where every month we give a bunch of games in the French defense, and I'm doing the French defense column for chess publishing. So I mention this move pretty often. I've got probably 15, 20 games, Grandmaster games with this. It is played by good players. It's not an obscure, it's not a completely obscure opening, even though it looks kind of silly. This game, by the way, was played in the World Blitz Championship, but a lot of strong players have used h6 in serious games. Most notably, Nigel Short has used it, and Nakamura has used it. And many grandmasters have used it in, for example, rapids tournaments and things like that. As you know, in the super tournaments, they have a tendency to only play, they don't even play the French that much. They have a tendency to only play e4, e5, and e4, c5. But you know, even Carlsen has played the French in some pretty critical games. He's beaten Karyakin a few times. In fact, I was even looking at Carlsen games in the French the other day, and I realized he had lost a key game to Caruana in, I guess it was a winnower. Was it a winnower or was it knight f6? No, I can't remember. But the funny thing is he stood better out of the opening. So even then, I was thinking, well, maybe that's why he gave it up, but actually he stood better in that game too. So he's done well with the French, he just hasn't played it very much. I think he trusts it, but it's a lot easier to keep the draw in hand as black if you play e4, e5. And that's why you're seeing that so often at the very top now, is they don't mind drawing as black. Even Carlsen doesn't mind drawing as black or getting some position that's at least superficially looks very sterile. Why am I saying all that? Oh, just because it's Carlsen is black in a French defense. And okay, so it's a Tarrasch variation with h6. So what's the point of h6? Okay, one point is, you might ask, what's the point of knight d2? What's White's next move? It's a funny move. It's a very good move because it defends this, and it doesn't get your knight pinned the way this does. This can get your knight pinned. And this also has the advantage, knight c3 also has a disadvantage that you don't have, if you're going to play e5 at some point, you don't have the move c3 anymore if you play knight c3. So that's one of the ideas with knight d2, but knight d2 is also a little awkward. It blocks off this bishop, and it's a little unclear what your next move is going to be. Because if you play here, then you sort of wonder, if you're going to play knight f3, then you kind of wonder what the, for example, here, which I think is what White did. Now this knight can't go here, which is what it usually does, because, and if it goes here, if it goes to b3, then there's this question of this move b6 restricting the knight, and then that knight can also be attacked with c5, c4, or a5. It's not a very good square on b3, in other words. So in a way, you're kind of wondering, well, where is this knight going? That's why a move like h6 or a6 on the third move, or even a5. Recently, I've been writing in my column about this move a5, which Tomniachichi has played repeatedly for quite a few years. And you go, how can you make a move like that in chess? Well, the answer is really that White made a funny move too. It doesn't look that funny to begin with, but it kind of is. In that it's hard for White to formulate a plan in some ways. And a5 tends to be useful after almost anything that White can do. Now, I'm not suggesting a5 completely equalizes if White plays perfectly, but just to show you that you can make these slow moves against knight d2 that you could never make in main lines. It's a very fascinating line. If White plays takes, the knight's not well placed for an exchange variation. You know, it goes here or something, black just develops naturally, and now black's even in development and has stopped bishop g5, which is a big exchange variation move, and White still is kind of just trying to get his pieces out. I mean, there's no really good place for that knight, is what it amounts to in the exchange variation. So what White almost always does is either bishop d3, and bishop d3 has a disadvantage that the bishop doesn't necessarily want to commit to this yet. And let me show you why. If black plays, for example, c5 and White takes that, and black takes with the pawn, not that he always does, but if he does, usually the move bishop b5 check is the best way to try and exploit that. The move bishop d3 is considered too passive. It also blocks off the control of the d4 square, which is critical because there's going to be an isolated pawn here. So the same thing applies here, that if black plays h6 and white plays bishop d, or any slow move, by the way, a6, h6, and white plays bishop d3, well, then black can switch back into c5 because these positions are considered perfectly good for black. You can also take with the queen, by the way, here, and because the bishop isn't particularly well placed there. So that's one reason bishop d3. Oh, now that's by no means the final story, because black can take this and white can play there. And this position is considered very complicated, this kind of position. So I'm not saying that's the end of the story at all. This is the main line, actually. But just to give you kind of the reasons why when white commits after h6 or a6, same thing applies in both cases, that committal move can cause a problem in some ways. So, so anyway, in this game he plays the normal move, and black plays the normal move. And maybe it's worth pointing out also that bishop g5 is stopped in all that. Well, I'll just continue here. And white protects that. Now, what's the idea here? The idea is you go back this way and you attack the center, and that's a normal Tarrasch variation, except that black has h6 in. This is called the universal system in the Tarrasch, to put that knight there instead of putting that knight there and swinging the other one over here. And in the universal system, black often wants to play the move g5. So here he can play g5. Now, what's the difference? Normally, black will have another move besides h6 in. He'll have a move like, this will be back there, and he'll have a move like bishop here in and play g5. Well, it turns out that having h6 in actually can be an advantage. Einhorn pointed this out. He played another grandmaster that played h6 on the third move. He pointed out how valuable it can be to have h6 in, because that leaves the bishop more flexible. For example, if white takes now, which is a very common idea, black can take with the bishop without having wasted a move going to e7 first. The other thing is there's not a bunch of tactics involving knight takes or bishop takes. For example, after knight b3, maybe bishop back, there's no bishop takes because of h6. So h6 is just a very, very subtle, interesting move. So let me just show you this game anyway. This game went bishop d3, very safe move, and black counterattacked in the center. And notice that if white plays this, now we're transposing to the variation we just looked at. So white plays c3. The only thing about a move like c3 is you're going to end up getting some sort of isolated pawn as white. On the other hand, that's a very slow move. So Carlsen has found a system where at least h6 is not a particularly impressive move. And white castles and black exchanges. Now you can play this way still and play this position. That's happened. It's in my chess publishing column, a game with that, a grandmaster game with that. So it's not a terrible move. But most people are going to go, okay, it's time to take that. And it's time to take this. And now in this game, he just plays a simple developing move. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now Denis Yevseev in his book for white recommends playing here and playing just a typical isolated pawn position. And one thing I would say about that is this move h6 can be quite useful because it stops bishop g5, and it's got some other advantages too. So maybe this line is not so bad for black, pretty reasonable, probably about equal. Carlsen decides instead to just play his rook over to an open file. Carlsen develops this bishop, and that's because the bishop can't go to g5 like it would normally go. You could still play Yevseev's move there. What else could you play? Well, white doesn't have that many other plans here. a3 is a good solid waiting move in an isolated pawn position that you could play. It's useful for several reasons, but in any case, he picks this move instead. The only thing is that's kind of passive on that square, so black really should be okay here. Black plays the most aggressive move now, trying to win the bishop pair in some positions. It's not forced at all, but it's one way of doing it. In fact, this is considered in the books the best way to answer this. And then b6, and I think black's fine here. This is about an equal position. White has two center pawns to one, that's good, but black has the two bishops. So I won't go into any detail there, but I think black's okay there. Carlsen picks another way to do it. He goes there, always a useful move. a3 is always useful. For one thing, it has ideas of playing bishop back, queen up, or bishop c2, and then kind of indirectly threatening checkmate down there on h7 without getting hit by knight b4. One of the knights going to b4. Okay, so black just fianchettos. White gets his bishop, gets his rook with tempo, attacking that. Black defends, and white comes back. And sure enough, one of white's ideas now is to play queen d3, move this knight somewhere, and threaten checkmate. So black plays rook c8. White probably plays queen d3, yes. And now this move g6 doesn't work because the bishop takes h6. So g6 is sort of a common answer to queen d3, but here it's not playable. So what black plays instead is f5. Now that's a big weakening move, and you might think, aha, Carlsen's got the advantage against this Potzerish g6, h6 move. The problem is that in order to get this, he's had to make this slow move, this passive and slow move, he's let black get everything. A nice outpost on d5, good development, all his pieces are out, and so f5, even though it's kind of an anti-positional move because it weakens e6, is quite playable. So white comes back, and black plays here. Now black could just take this. And if white takes here, that's not a bad position for white for a pawn because he has some really nice squares. So that's really unclear. That's very weak. Bishop a2 could follow. On the other hand, he is a pawn ahead. I don't think anybody would really claim that white was actually objectively better there. And you really don't want to take with the rook because then this isolated pawn is particularly exposed. And you don't have any dynamism in your position. So black could go here and start piling up on the d file and on the long diagonal. So I don't know. This is probably all okay for black. But Carlsen's just trying to get a game. He's not panicking or anything. Anyway, black played there instead with a little indirect pressure on that square. And white played there. Nice move, indirectly attacking e6 and attacking the d5 square. And that, I think, now white's fairly happy with his basic position here. But so is black. I mean, he's reinforced that he has two long diagonals for his bishop, so he has one huge weakness on e6. On the other hand, white has a weakness on d4. Both sides have good active pieces. Now black defends e6. He's lucky that there's no other way to really get good pressure on e6. So white doesn't even try that. White tries to attack. Now white has two bishops, but black has a beautiful bishop on the long diagonal and a beautiful outpost. And simplifications tend to help you when you're playing against an isolated pawn. So black's glad to get one pair of minor pieces off. Rook f6 is an odd move. I'm not quite sure why he didn't just play here, and this was suggested. And then maybe just defend that square, because then you're ready to move these knights over to these squares, or maybe later play e5. I think black's just fine here. No real problems at all. What he played was a little bit funny, maybe a little artificial, probably equal, but a little artificial. Doubling is natural, but didn't work out very well. I've been saying Carlsen for white here. I wonder if any of you caught that. I meant Carlsen being black, so I'm crazy. Sorry about that. Just dug this game up, and I was asked about this game, but I kind of forgot who was who here. So no wonder black's doing so well. And black gets a nice game here. The problem is black was threatening knight f4 followed by bishop takes or knight takes on g2. So white has to start simplifying. And this knight is still attacked. Bishop has to take. And black throws in this extra knight takes move, winning material. See, the problem was if white had not taken that, this was hanging. So actually, this is just a blunder, this move. Rook c here. He should have just moved his rook back, probably. This rook back. So white's the one making mistakes. My mistake. Is a very strong grandmaster, Melkumian, but he made a mistake there. This is tactically bad now, this position, because of this threat of knight f4. I guess there's no way out for black. Black's going to be better now, no matter what. Okay, so black wins material, it looks like, except that now the rook's hanging. The problem is that black gets this move in, or rook g6 is a good move too, and this is sort of semi-pinned along the file. But still, white's right in it. I was wrong. White's still surviving this. So he protects his queen, and then there's this interesting move where black tries to win material win two pieces for the rook, and that's fine, except the only possible problem is there's a little bit of a counterattack here. I'm getting mixed up here. This is my fault, folks. At this point, what has been happening here? Okay, at this point we have white, okay, exchanging, but then black takes a rook. He takes back. And so white right now is actually ahead materially, right? And black gives back some of the material, but black actually, Oh, win some material, excuse me. Okay, so he gets the material back. That's the problem. He was ahead to begin with. I was wondering what was going on there. So he gets his material back that way. The only problem is white has plenty of counterplay with these kinds of moves. So it's only about equal here. Okay, black defends that square. And these are probably not totally accurate moves, but I think they are actually in time trouble by now. Black starts attacking pawns. White should have played queen c8 here, apparently, according to my notes, because then he can get everything off the board. Then he can start exchanging things. And this ends up being drawn. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of perpetual checks. But white played slightly inaccurately, played that move, and allowed black to actually play this move, after which white has no penetration moves and is probably going to lose a pawn somewhere. This pawn could fall, that pawn could fall. So black was actually better here. Carlsen was better here. Uncharacteristically, he misses that move, probably because they're both in just terrific time trouble. And so that's now equal. Maybe I won't go any further because I don't want to spend too much time. And this game was eventually, not surprisingly, won by black, but not because of the opening, as you can tell. It's just an equal. It's been an equal opening, almost the whole opening, and it's equal here too. Okay. Anyway, kind of fun seeing the world champion play the French, but also play this crazy move h6. But h6 deserves a lot of attention. As far as I know right now, it's still a completely sound option, and not much better than it looks. It looks absolutely ridiculous not to develop a piece. Okay, now I've got a bunch of other games, but I want to get to the chat. Let me see. Oh, a lot of stuff. Okay. Do you know if there's a composition chess puzzle position which every move leads to a capture from each side, leaving only the kings after the last capture? Or is that impossible? No, that should be quite possible. And I don't know one, but I bet there are ones there. And I don't know exactly how you'd search for that. Maybe someone else has an idea. But yes, absolutely, I'm sure there's a puzzle like that where there's captures all the way to the end. And I'm sure someone did it intentionally, just to have some fun. I wish I could show you one. I'll take a look at it, Jordan, after the show and see if I can somehow dig that up. But I wouldn't know how to do that. Maybe Tim Crabbe's site has something like that. It has things for multiple captures, for streaks of captures. Okay, bishop e3, queen d2, intending bishop h6 is a common theme. Yeah. Will you please describe some uncommon prioms? Prioms. Either my English is lacking, or I don't know what a priome is. Probably it's a chess maneuver. Uncommon prioms. I'm going to skip that one for now, but you can ask it again. You can send me an email about it so I can really know what to answer exactly. Here we go. We've got a new. Let me just put a new game up. I want to show you this game from last week. I was asked about this this line in the Queen's Gambit, and I want to give that, and I promised I'd give a good answer about it, so I'm going to do that. But I'm not going to show it yet. I'm going to answer your questions first, but I'm going to put the game up for it so that we can have a game up to play with. Okay, so the question is d4, knight f6, f3, d5, g4. Yeah, I just don't believe it. I don't like moves like g4 this early in the game. You could always just play h6. I don't think that's a threat anyway. What would be my favorite answer to this? Yeah, c5, h6, even e5 is kind of crazy, but that would be a little bit crazy. c5 is just so natural. I'm not even sure about this. For example, if he takes here, we might have something very dramatic. This doesn't work, does it? This probably doesn't work. You'd have to open the D file and hope for a big attack. I'll tell you, I'd be scared as white. Even here, I'd be scared as white. I doubt if that's completely sound, but okay, so that's too crazy. So E5, probably you don't want to do. But C5. And what does white do? If white starts supposedly attacking, he's got no pieces out. He's got a hugely weakened king side. And black's already won the center. Black's moves are knight C6, E5. Don't like it at all. So I just don't like g4 at all. And if you don't play g5, what are you going to do? If you take, there's an e5, and this is looking horrendous for white. So yeah, I don't think g4 is a good move. That's just my opinion. You can disagree with me, and that's fine. Ah, here we go. Nothing, h4, if e5, kick the knight out with g5. Yeah, it just doesn't really work. You guys can look at that yourself, but I can almost guarantee you this is just not sound. Even though you get the move g5 in, it's not good enough. Could you explain what artificial means? I hear it a lot, and I think many are not sure what that means. I would say it's doing things that aren't according to sort of what are considered chess principles, and that's scary because chess principles are often not true at all or not good. Maybe I would say there are artificial moves that are excellent, that are very, very good moves. But what you mean by it, but they're usually not good, and the idea is that they violate some principle. And this is, of course, a great example here. It's artificial because it not only moves a pawn without developing a piece for 3 straight pawn moves without developing a piece, but it weakens the king side dramatically, for example, that diagonal. So that's artificial. You don't want to move pawns in front of your king, and this is essentially exposing your king. Also it creates, it does nothing to help your development. It doesn't prepare your development. Now, all that doesn't mean it's bad. Artificial moves can be good, but you have to be at least very suspicious of them. You have to worry about them and think, if I'm going to make this move, I better have a good reason for doing it. And a lot of times there is a good reason for doing something. But when you do these flank moves, normally if you're going to move a lot of pawns, you'd rather move center pawns. Pawns right next to these pawns, or this one of these 4 pawns more often than not. Or maybe fianchetto, for example, move like b3 and bishop b2 because that gets a new piece into play on an effective square, or g3. But g4, it's just weakening. Artificial just means not natural. For example, moving a piece many times is considered artificial. Let's say white had played, I don't know, not a good example. If white had played here and black played here and white made some move like this, you'd probably say, well, that's artificial because it moves a piece for the second time. Sure, maybe it helps stop c5. That was the point. And sometimes it's a good idea, but here it's wasting time. So you don't want to violate the principles about time in the center is usually what artificial means, something that violates one of those principles. And you can sometimes violate those principles and do just perfectly well because you've got another reason for making the move you made, but often not. Knight g5, bishop d5. In which line, Juan Arias? Maybe I missed your question. Oh, here we go. Knight f3, d5. Okay, let's take a look at this. Knight f3, d5. So is this going to be a... I also have one about the winnower. We'll get to that. c4, so this is a ready variation. dc, accepted, ready variation. e5, c5, whoops, sorry. e3, bishop e6. Oh, yes, people do play this move sometimes. You can also play e4 there, by the way. It's an interesting move. And after e4, I think bishop e6 is less sound because there's no, the knight g5, you don't have this resource. But don't quote me. So e3, you're trying to get it. Now, if black just played a normal move here, you might very well get a queen's gambit accepted position, something like this. That's a standard, standard queen's gambit accepted position. Sorry about that c6 move, c5. So that's a normal position. But black wants to hold on to his pawn. See what he can do about just holding on to his pawn by playing bishop e6. And that has been played in other positions too, where black tries to, similar d4 positions, where he tries to hold on to that pawn. Okay, Panchenko, Laputyan went knight g5. Well, see, now, yeah, white's wasting a tempo here, so with e4, because he's already played e3. So my guess is black's probably okay here. It's just guessing. But that's a whole extra tempo. e6 attacking the knight. Now, the other thing you have to ask yourself is, what would happen if... Are we so sure that black can't just play... Okay. I mean, the knight looks a little artificial out there. Why can't black just retreat and then play here? Hard to say. Maybe d4 is playable. That's a tough position. I'm not sure. Probably black's okay there is my guess. The other thing you can do is say, okay, I'm not that worried about losing this piece because I've got an H file and that's a little weak. So I don't know what you think of this position. But actually queen b3 is threatened now, so maybe white's fairly happy. White has 2 bishops here. Black's got some activity. Probably black doesn't want to play this way. It looks kind of funny. Okay, so this has gotten very interesting. Even with e4, there's some pretty good points, aren't there? So e6 suddenly becomes a very natural move, attacking this knight and getting some pieces out, opening up your position a little bit too. So then what happened? E takes d5 or d4? E takes d5, queen g5. Now probably something like d takes e6. Yes, queen e5 check. I guess what you have to do is you have to decide what do I think of this position. You know, white really can't take that, I don't think, because the queen takes g2. So black temporarily is a pawn ahead and is ready to just simply develop. Knight f6, bishop d6, castles queenside. He'll have an open file, an open f file. So white has to try something like d4, counterattacking on the queen. But black should be, I think, fairly comfortable here. What about bishop b4 check? I don't know if that does any good. Probably just queen back. So you have to assess what you think about a position like this. I actually have no idea. I don't know what to say. I think I would be okay with black, I think. I'd also be okay with white. I mean, after all, white has two bishops, and that e-pawn is weak. But white is having some trouble getting developed. So that'd be my first instinct, is something like this could happen. Instead, he plays queen e5 check, which strikes me as getting behind in development. It's a funny move. Bishop e2, I assume. Queen e2. Okay. See, I would think, okay, go there, and if he takes that castle and you're ready to play rook e1, you're ready to just pile up on that pawn and take it, you know, queen a4 or something. I like white here offhand, but you know, who knows? I don't know why queen e5 was played. Queen e2, these are very strong players playing, so I'm sure they know what they're doing. Knight c6, that makes sense because now if queen takes, at least you have knight takes covering e3 and c4. So I like knight c6. ef7 check, keeping the king in the center. This really makes you wonder about this queen e5 check move. King d1, just trying to free the bishop, or the queen. Well, black's caught up in development and has rook e8. Okay, so queen e5 check is looking good. I guess I'd worry, here's what I'd worry about. I'd worry about that move. I'm not at all convinced about this. It seems to me that white has decent chances here. Bishop g4 or bishop c4. d4, even if it costs a pawn. Rook e1. It's scary. Queen a4, queen c2. It's just all kind of scary. I'm not saying that you aren't equal as black, but I'm just not thrilled. Maybe something like here and here, threatening rook e1, castles queenside maybe? Oh, rook e1 covered. Oh, e6 is hanging. Sorry, can't play there. Whoops, so this is a terrible line. Sorry, I apologize. Knight c6 is probably pretty bad. Maybe he has to try and hold on to that for a while. But anyway, that's what I would recommend for white. It's more fun than queen e2. Queen e2, I think black did a good thing here because the king isn't in any trouble because you're going to get the queens off and have a good grip on the position. Let's see what happened. King d1. It makes sense, actually. Otherwise, rook e1's coming. Takes. Knight e5, and black seems to be doing fine. I agree, unless he can win this with check with f4 or something. Oh, f4, knight d3, yeah. Yeah, I don't know who's better here. Remember, white has the two bishops, and no matter how passive bishops look, in the end game, they're always very dangerous, and we're coming very close to an end game. So I wouldn't underestimate white's position here. On the other hand, I don't like where his king is, and he's got this isolated pawn, and white still has to get his pawn back. So I guess I agree. I think black's probably doing okay here. That'd be my guess. Very interesting. So I'd look at that. If I was going to try and improve on that for white, I would look at that bishop e2 line. Okay. Just a reminder, thank you. Priom is a maneuver in Russian. Oh, how interesting. Yeah, spelled prim is a Russian noun that is used directly and generically in English to represent a sort of typical maneuver technique in chess. Oh, yeah? Well, I'm not sure if that's real common. We'll have to Google it. I'll take your word for it. I could be missing that. Source Wikipedia, that's a good source. Okay, I'll buy that. So a prim, huh? Here's a chess term that I don't even know. Can you imagine that after all these years? Okay, I'll look it up. Fun stuff. Artificial castling, okay. Yeah, artificial castling is a little different though because it's probably the best move in the position. Artificial castling is when you want to get castled. Let me show you an example. Let's say you played b3 here, which by the way isn't such a bad move, and attacked this and then got some pieces out. Artificial castling is when you can't castle anymore, but you're worried about being in the center, so you move your king up and then you move your rook over and then you move your king back, and it's as if you castled. It's also called castling by hand. And I guess it's artificial. In a way, it's not that artificial because you've already moved your king and you might have to do it. But, well, you looked it up. You're 61. Well, I'm not as embarrassed then that I've never heard of it. But that's actually fun. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. I'm sure the Russians in the audience and or in the chess world are very familiar with this. Okay, and then I'm being asked, are there other typical maneuvers? Well, obviously there's infinite numbers of typical chess maneuvers, so that's going to be a hard question to ask. The original question is going to be difficult to answer, but this is fun. Okay, let me quickly show you that thing from last week, because I did promise that. It was a great question from, who was it? Simone Fiorella, and she was absolutely right about it, by the way. I was unfamiliar with this line. Let me just do this. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't start with d4. It's a Queen's Gambit. This is just a normal Queen's Gambit, but Tarrasch variation, okay? But it's a funny order. It's a Tarrasch variation where knight f3 is already in. And this position, black plays this funny. Instead of playing back into a normal, for example, semi-Tarrasch, which we've talked about, and we talked about last week, that well, part of her question is, what about the semi-Tarrasch? So we talked about this position. But then she asked about c takes d4. By the way, I'm assuming it's Simone is a she. And if not, I apologize. And queen takes d4. And this line with, well, anyway, this whole idea. Okay, this is one of the lines. Did I put up the right variation? I think I want to put up Mohamed Yarov first. Excuse me. Let me put up another game. It's the same variation, but I want to put up another game. Let me do this. Same variation, but different actual game. Okay, let's do this because I want to show the original question first. Okay, so here's the original question. There. C takes d4, this move. Now, in the past, this has been considered slightly inferior for a reason that you'll see in a second. Where is that Mohamed Yarov game? Give me a second. I don't see it offhand. I would like to have my notes in front of me for this because I want to show you some sidelines too. That would be good if I had them. How unusual. Oh, here it is, Mohamed Yarov YE. She mentioned that YE has been playing this and getting draws for black. Okay, now one thing I wanted to mention is this is an interesting move, but black, it turns out that even this, a whole pawn down, is actually a pretty decent position because you gain a lot of time on the queen. Very, very similar to the Hennig-Schara gambit, which you can look up. But even more interesting is this, because if white plays check, then black's about to take this, so white has to go here, and then black takes this, and now white can't take the rook because of captures, threatening to queen, and then bishop b4 check, and black is just, white's king is stuck in the center, and he gets creamed. So what black would do would be, what white would do would be to just take this back and say, okay, I'm going to win your rook anyway. But then black has a very simple maneuver, which is this, threatening bishop c6, and black's probably just winning this position too. I mean, there's a few complications, but it's basically extremely good. So, so there's queen a4 check, which has been played, but it's just not very good. So the main line is just taking back here, and black just takes back. And this is and that's the move that for years has been thought to favor white by a little bit. And historically, it's done pretty well for white. Not overwhelmingly, but quite well. But recently, black's been drawing a whole bunch of games, as Simone pointed out, because of this variation, capturing, which I guess before was thought to just make too many weaknesses. It leaves the king in the center. White's going to get the pawn back either here or here. And white's got good development. And white's going to get rook d1 check in with tempo. Well, it just turns out black can coordinate pretty well here. And by the way, this goes way back to Marshall Lasker. Lasker played this as black, so that's kind of cool. After this move, Marshall played this move, and black really had no troubles at all here in this position. Right now, he played bishop e6, just like YE. I think it's actually easier to play just this move, which in our line wouldn't be so good because it's a self-pin, but here I think it's just dead equal. Marshall played this, Lasker played this move. White castled. Anyway, it ended up being about equal, maybe a little bit better for white if white had played correctly. But king e8 was dead equal, so actually bishop takes c6 doesn't seem to be very good, as proven by a game from their match in 1907, so 110 years ago. So isn't chess fun? So instead, white doesn't take on c6. White just goes like this, And let me show you a few more moves, because these moves have happened pretty often. This exact position has come up several times. And this move turns out to be just a little slow. This was played fairly recently between some very strong players, but 2600 player was white, and white got the better game. So just that a6 tempo made a huge difference here because white gained too many squares. Let me just show you briefly how that works. These dark squares all fell apart. There's no way of going to a dark square now for black, so he has to go the wrong direction. And then white won some more dark squares. By the way, this is a very good move. Just bishop d2, getting rid of that dark square bishop. But this was good too. b4, bishop b6. And did I get this wrong? I think knight takes has already happened. Yeah, I think I've got this wrong because I think knight takes had already happened. So let me do that. And white can just play bishop b5 check or rook e1. But the point is that after a move like that, white can play the move rook e1, and if pawn takes, he comes out a pawn ahead. But if the pawn doesn't take, white's got great pressure here, plus the dark squares. He's got moves like knight c5 coming up. For example, let's say he walks out of that. Of course, then there's knight d6 check. But even if he could get out of this, I guess is what I'm saying, you'd have this problem with bishop e3, followed by putting a piece on c5, and black has big weaknesses in the endgame. So that's a good example. So in this game, he didn't waste the move a6. He just captured and then played king e7 right away. And white played here. And this has come up in several games. White should theoretically have some tiny advantage here, but black's managed to draw most of these games. White played bishop takes c6. I think that's maybe not the best move. Although actually it's maybe okay, but I think a3 first, committing the bishop, is probably a little bit better. And there's a whole bunch of games with this. There's also a game with bishop a4. But basically, what's going on here is that these top players think that they can draw this as black. I mean, just for example, you're never going to win this as black against a halfway decent player because you have the only weaknesses. They're on an open file. There's an outpost in front of the file, which means black at best will exchange off as one of his bishops and not have the bishop pair anymore. So it's going to be very hard to win a position like this. That's a problem. But for these guys at the top, like Wai Zhu Wenjun, has played this a ton of times. Who else? Mamedyarov switched and played it as black, I believe. They figure they can draw this position. And that's what they care about, is drawing as black. So I wouldn't really recommend this to black for average players. I guess if you're playing a grandmaster and you've studied it and you think you can draw it. But very typical in that respect, that black's willing to give up a minor disadvantage. Now, you could also have played h3 there. White was a little bit better playing a3 here again. For example, there was a game with this, and black actually played here. And white should have just played here now. And believe it or not, this is slightly better for white just because the knight is so dominant. Bishop's not a bad piece, but the knight's really a good piece. Not enough to win, though, probably. Well, almost certainly not enough to win. So in this game, white played this move, trying to take advantage of the weakness here and the outpost on c5. And black played a good move, protected c6 and attacked the knight. White checked, and black played there. But now look, this knight is a beautiful outpost, and no one can get rid of it. It's there permanently. Whereas this bishop, even though it's a nice outpost, kind of has a defensive function. So white's knight is really better than black's bishop, and black has two weak pawns. So you could play this out forever. I think white should have played this now and just tortured black forever. I think it's definitely a draw, and black would have drawn because black's a great player, Yi. But on an average level, just thinking about this for the average player, white could win an awful lot of games from this position. And even a good player has to be very careful. If you give this position to Magnus Carlsen as white, I think you might end up regretting it. Even a top player, even a 2700 player, might not be thrilled with this. But anyway, I think this is an interesting positional game, and I wanted to report that because I was asked about it last week, and I think everything Simone said was right. This is probably a drawable position. Let me show you something else you could play against it, though. I just made this up last week, but it turned out it's true that you can play this instead. And in a way, I think this is more interesting for the average player to play. What you do is you avoid this line, and I only found one way to avoid it, and it's the one I just happened to mention last week. It goes like this. This is a game between Zhu Wenjun, who is black and plays this line, and has been very successful with it, and Tan Zhongxi, There are two Chinese players. And they made the same moves. There's that pin. Now notice the trick, by the way, folks, for those of you who don't play these things. It looks like you're winning a pawn, but check wins the queen. So that's a trick you always have to avoid. So white, instead of that, plays here. Okay, this is the other idea, is just put your bishop on g5, then put the pawn here to restrain this pawn from moving, and just play against the isolated pawn. And even though black's okay in these positions, something I mentioned last week was putting the queen here. And I think that was a pretty good idea. White has very seldom played, white has mainly played queen a4 and done reasonably well with it. But I suggested playing this with rook d1 and bishop e2 as your kind of your setup. And I looked at it, and white's played this a couple of times and won a couple of games and drawn a couple of other games and had the advantage in at least 3 of those games. So I'm not quite sure why people aren't playing this, but I think it'd be a fun way to play. The option is to play queen a4, and that's won some games too. I think all these are equal if black plays perfectly, but they can be kind of fun. Now, one thing to avoid is going queenside. Remember we talked about how dangerous it is to go queenside in d4 openings? This is a very good move, just cutting the king off. And it looks silly because the bishop can just block it off, right? But then after the bishop blocks it off, black comes back again and still has a good bishop, but has stopped the pressure on d5. So this position, I think, slightly favors black. He's going to play rook c8 and attack, maybe attack on the queen side that way too. And if white plays the natural move, bishop c4, then I think, oh yeah, queen c8 is quite a good move. We just pressure against the king here, giving up a pawn, and giving up a pawn doesn't hurt you at all here. Because, let me show you this, bishop takes, knight takes, and I think b5 is a fantastic move here, if I'm not mistaken. Opening up more lines on the queen side. And it's just very awkward to answer. He pretty much has to play queen takes, and then you have rook b8. Look at this pressure coming down here against the king. This is just a very easy position to play, and very good for black. Watch out castling queenside, even when you think you're ahead in development or you have an attack in queenside openings. It's just so dangerous. It's a little tip. So instead of after castling, you're better off just playing bishop e2. And then I give this as an example line. Castles, a6, I don't know how good that is, but this was a game. Knight d4, queen b6, getting out of the way to connect rooks. Very logical what black's doing, maybe thinking about taking here sometimes. Queen b3. Anyway, this game led to a draw. White actually was maybe slightly better, but this game led to a draw eventually. So I like this queen d3 move better. Now let me just show you how that goes. A very instructive position. Putting the queen here is good in the Sicilian defense too. A lot of positions it's nice to put the queen there because it covers f5 and it gets you off the last rank, so you can put it as opposed to queen d1, and it's also just hard to attack. Let's show you what happened in this game. There we go, rook d1. I tend to think this rook can go to d1 also, but well, let's not talk about that. It's awfully natural anyway. Okay, so black plays that queen b6 move that we saw already, and white plays there. Now queen can't really take there. This is a common trick. Well, actually, it's not totally clear. It looks like you're losing the queen, though. Yeah, you're losing the queen. It is pretty easy. That's part of the point of a3, so there's no queen a3 move. Okay, so black simply brings a rook over to the center. White gains some space and dark squares. And black retreats. White indirectly attacks the queen. And black stops b5, and now I think, by the way, a real simple move here is just knight d4. And I think anybody would rather be white here. He's working against the isolated pawn. This bishop's a pretty bad bishop, whereas these bishops have scope. So you've got the better minor piece and a little bit of initiative. And I did some analysis of that, but I don't want to use up the whole hour doing that. We already have used it up. But I wanted to show that because of my question from last week. Are there some easy to remember plans against a hippopotamus defense? I'm getting back to the chat now. I'm still talking about Priam. That's kind of cool. Okay, yeah, we're pretty much done here, aren't we? This is pretty much done. Hippopotamus defense. Stay away from the water and the mud. Yeah, sounds good to me. The hippopotamus is just, the last thing I'll say today, the hippopotamus is just, and it doesn't matter what the first move is very much, it's just setting up all your pieces on the the third rank. For example, like this, maybe f6. You might even not even play bishop g7. You might just play all your moves. There's a lot of versions of the hippopotamus actually, so this is just one of them. Sometimes you play all kinds of crazy moves, even f6. But the real answer to a good setup is just get all your pieces off the first rank, take over the center, put rooks in the center, and then you can start advancing your pawns. If you want to be ambitious, you can play f4 and c4. You can go real crazy. You can play these kinds of moves. And then it's easier later to advance in the center and just attack, either with f5 or e5 or d5. But go slow. Get all your pieces out first. That's probably the biggest clue, is to get your pieces out first. Some hippopotamuses, the people they double fianchetto and they put their knights on e7 and d7. It depends which hippo you're talking about. But a position like this, white stands much, much, much better. And then you can start thinking about attacking. If he castles kingside that way, maybe you can start thinking about this move, but get your pieces out first. And then start advancing your center, or advance flank pawns. You can always advance flank pawns and attacks once all your pieces are out. Okay. So thank you, everybody. And I've gone on quite a while. I hope I answered some of your questions. I'll try to get to the rest of them. We still have stuff left over from the last couple of weeks. But please send me further questions at askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's the best place to send a nice email. I've not been getting too many of those. Or I'm happy to answer things on the chat, but you can also send on ICC. You can message John L. Watson. What else can you do? You could put things underneath the YouTube archived broadcasts. So thank you, everybody, and I'll see you next week.